Thank you all. And yeah, Brian and Jeff, thank you both for being here and for supporting our pre-conference with the Inside the Magic of Coaching. As you folks know, it's the neuroscience of changing minds and behaviors. And so there's an opportunity for me to ask some questions. I'd like to ask other folks to maybe hold some questions until the end. And if they have any that are kind of looming, feel free to throw them in the chat box. But I certainly have a series of questions that we've been working on, and I'll ask each question at a time, and then I'll hand it over to sort of Jeff and Brian to answer as they see fit. Brian, Jeff, any other thoughts before we begin the questions?
No, sounds great.
All right, so why don't we start with how did you come up with the idea for this institute?
Well, it's interesting. Both Jeff and I have been presenting different neuroscience topics at conferences for, I want to say 3 years now. And rarely have we ever been able to attend one another's sessions because either we were, scheduled at the same time, or it was just a tough decision about which session to go to. So at the end of the last conference, those who have attended before know that on Sunday morning, we gather some feedback and perspectives and so forth. And I believe it was actually Doug Moffat who suggested that maybe next year, Brian and Jeff get to hear one another because they present the Pre-Conference Institute together. So we proposed it, and here we are.
That's right. It's kind of a selfish thing.
Excellent,
we just want to present
Jeff,
together. So, yeah, we just want to present together. It's kind of selfish. We haven't been able to see each other's work. And every time we are together, we're in different meeting rooms presenting to different audiences.
Well,
so
we are the ones that get the benefit of that selfishness. So we appreciate it. What, if anything, surprised you as you began to develop your curriculum?
I think some of the things that surprised us is that there's more and more research and applied practices, so things that are evidence-based and things that are practice-based around how to use everything connected to your brain or where your brain resides and how it works in coaching, therapy, human interaction, workplace interaction. So as we put together the curriculum for the day, I know it sounds like it's not possible, but there's way too much to cover and digest. So I think the biggest surprise we had was what would be most useful to this audience. And we want to thank everybody who submitted questions to us by email over the past 4 to 5 weeks that really helped us frame up what you're thinking about and what's important to you.
Yeah, the other thing I would add to that is as much work as each of us has done in this field, we each had a whole lot of new knowledge to share even with one another.
And Brian and Jeff, before I move on to the next question, can I ask each of you to sort of bottom line just a little bit of context from both of your perspectives as to what this is? Just to grant for people who may not have actually read it on the website.
Sure. So from my lens, it's how can you use brain-based practices for yourself as the coach and with your clients so that you can use what's science-based, what's practice-based to get a better coaching experience for yourself and the client. It turns out when there's 2 or more brains in the room and when they're coaching and they're reflective, some fascinating things happen. And that's what we want you to that's one of the things we want you to walk away with. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, whether you know anything about neuroscience or not, it's at work. So this is a great opportunity to learn why so much of what you're doing is working, how you might make it work better, and how you might fill in some of the gaps where things don't go the way you would hope they go in your coaching. And just to add to that, as Jeff said, neuroscience doesn't just work in coaching. It's what we're going to be presenting and engaging people with is applicable in every aspect of your life.
So gentlemen, it was also clear when you looked at this, you were adopting a framework through ICF, and not all attendees are ICF certified coaches. And in fact, not everyone attending the conference will actually be a coach. So what was it about the ICF competencies that really supported your framework?
Well, first of all, they work. You know, they are very clearly based on what makes successful coaching. So it gave us a good approach for framing the day around everything from clarifying intention to powerful questioning to harvesting the learnings and developing an action plan for going forward, which, whether you're coaching or whether you're you know, having a conversation with an employee who's looking to build skills, it doesn't really matter. It's a great framework. In addition, we're covering how do you prepare yourself for a meaningful engagement with your client. What do you do to prepare your client for coaching? And we're also going to deal with the ethics of working with another person in this way.
Thanks, Brian. Jeff, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think for the non-coaching angle, you know, when we put this together, I was thinking about, you know, folks like Patrick, and when he's coaching entrepreneurs, but also working with them through what's it like to be an entrepreneur post-addiction or post some kind of trauma. Those competencies speak to really good interactions. And when I think about Bernie and Noor and a lot of their reflective practices and how they help their clients, whether it's counseling or coaching or whatever they're doing, that these competencies still come into play. And I've really been influenced by the last couple of years at the GCA conference by counselors and therapists and social workers and Adam and his, you know, spirituality work, that there are many, many sides to how this really works. And it's not just ICF coaches and ICF coaching approaches, that these behaviors and intentions really make a difference in the way we interact with the people we're trying to help.
Yeah, it sounds like you've both been incredibly intentional and thoughtful about how we can just serve more people with what we do. So that's wonderful. And you've asked participants to submit questions to you about the neuroscience of coaching that they're doing. And many coaches, not just here, but throughout the coaching industry, haven't probably thought about neuroscience at all. So why was this an important way of looking at coaching?
Well, I think from my perspective, what I learned from coaching inside corporations in the mid-2000s was that the science approach and the brain-based approach was the only way many of those organizationally skeptical people would actually enter into coaching. It's a framework and a lens and a channel through which some people really connect with coaching and they wouldn't otherwise, because when you say, let's get some 360 stakeholder feedback and then I'm going to show it to you and then I'm going to shadow you in your meetings, they're like, oh, that sounds horrible. You know, I don't want any of that. But when you tell them you're going to teach them how to use their own brains and you're going to use a brain-based approach to get their best ideas going so they can solve things at work and make things better for their team, they're willing to look at science. That's what drove me to it. And I think that's why it's useful for any coach or any person who's doing in the helping professions and interacting with other humans to consider it and figure out what one or two things they might take away from it.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is at the Institute, we're going to spend the whole day practicing things that you can take away from it. So this is really yes, we're going to cover the science, but this is not a science class. It's not, certainly not a lecture.
So, and I'm just going to add sort of a responsibility to the people attending. I know I've been guilty of that person who comes to the conference like, wait, I was supposed to submit something, and then does it that morning. Let's encourage each other to ensure that we get these folks their information that they desire in order to run an effective pre-conference. So if you're attending, please follow up on any of your responsibilities there. What might be one neuroscience insight that participants will learn?
Well, I'm going to tackle that one, and then Jeff may add to it. But about 3 years ago, I took a course called Conversational Intelligence, Neuroscience for Coaching, and it was taught by a woman who is now deceased, named Judith E. Glasser. And she taught us about, first of all, about some functioning of the brain up in our heads. The prefrontal cortex, which is the newest part of our brain, is where empathy is seated. It's where problem solving takes place. It's where logic and reason are found. It's where those problem solving, those creative activities take place. It takes 1/10 of a second to trigger the prefrontal cortex. Back here in our brain is the amygdala, which is the oldest part of our brain. It is the site of our fight, flight, freeze, appease response. It takes 7/100ths of a second to trigger. If you trigger the amygdala, it starts electrochemical activity in the brain that starts to block access to the prefrontal cortex. So there's a 3/100ths of a second difference there between triggering the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. This fight, flight, freeze, appease gets first shot. So that's important in terms of how you phrase your questions to your clients, how you approach how you even start to build the relationship and the dialogue with clients. And Judith taught us a whole lot, but there's one model that she taught us that I just love. And I hate acronyms. Acronyms are about, you're not in my club because you don't know what I mean when I say ACMP. Here's one acronym that I use, and it's from Judith, and it's TRUST, trust. And it's built on the neuroscience of how you build trust. And we'll go into a lot more detail around this in the Institute, but it's about establishing transparency, T, building relationship, R, shared understanding, the deep understanding that comes with walking in somebody else's shoes, shared success, and finally, T, the hard truths, truth-telling. So again, we're going to go into a lot more detail on that, but I found that a great model when I'm working with clients. Just one quick story, was working with a client who said that she was really having trouble closing business because she was a consultant. And she said, sometimes I get into arguments with my prospective clients during the sales call. Well, clearly that's not a way to build trust, but the way that we worked was, said, I'd like to invite you to walk through a lens of how you are interacting with your clients. And she said, sure. So I just said, let's talk about, what you do to build transparency. And we walked through, and by the time we got to the tough truths, she knew exactly where she needed to shift, how she was thinking about her clients, how she was showing up. So that's just one example.
Thank you, Brian. That was excellent. Thank you. Jeff, any additions to that?
Yeah, just a couple. Just one thing that, you know, Brian says he hates acronyms because it really, you know, keeps people from being part of the club. Unfortunately, our brains love acronyms. We love any shortcut that helps us hardwire a really complicated concept. So acronyms are our friends. They're your brain's friend. I think one insight, neuroscience insight that participants will learn is how to dampen the emotional triggers in your clients or their resistance as you coach with them, as you counsel, as you interact with them, and how to get their brain engaged in reflection and thinking about their thinking instead of focusing on the problem. I know we all have lots of ways to do that, and when you leave the Pre-Conference Institute, you're going to have so many more ways to do it. You're going to practice it with each other and experience it. One of the things I loved about Brian's session some time ago was the interaction of having you actually experience what does some of this feel like if you're in a coaching moment. And we're going to give the group that's there plenty of time during the day to experience brief coaching moments. You don't have to come as a coach, but we're going to have you practice these brain-based interactions, and you're going to feel it and sense it and know what it's like to be on the receiving end, and you're going to know what it's like to be on the delivery end as well. So I'm looking forward to those insights and how people will respond to those. We're also going to do a lot of sharing of what you learned and what you experienced. It turns out Brian and I are only two brains in the room, so we're not as powerful as all the brains in the room, so we're going to tap into everybody's brain.
Jeff, I really like what you shared there, and I think that's one of the biggest difference of the pre-conference is that in the present sort of experiential experience where you have the opportunity to practice more than perhaps you do when you're in sort of a 75-minute session and really get to the root of some learning. So, and you know, you learn it and you do it. So thanks for sharing that. That was excellent. One of the important lessons of neuroscience is that we can be coaching based on myth about how the brain works. It was my understanding, Brian and Jeff, that we wanted to sort of explore some of this to see whether or not they are myths. And how did you want to do this with the group today?
So Alan, if you would pull up the poll, we've got 5 myths. Ask participants to just go through true, false, answer each of them, and then we will work our way through them. Alan, if you can just sort of keep us in track of how many responses you got there.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. 3 of 16, we have 18% voted. Results are coming in.
I just realized I need my glasses.
Half have voted.
How are we doing that, Alan?
11 of 16.
Okay, let's just give it a few more seconds here.
And I believe I, as the host, cannot vote, so.
And Gary should not.
Oh, right.
I felt
Okay,
like
let's see what we have here, Alan.
It's Mayor Pete.
14 of 16, I think that's all we're gonna get, right?
Okay, yep.
Because I can't vote and yeah, okay. All right, we're ending the poll. Share results. You can see that, right?
So yeah, I'm just gonna briefly jot these down and then we can walk through them. Okay, so Jeff, do you want to take the first one? Some people are more left-brained while others are more right-brained. Left-brained people are more analytical, logical, detail-oriented, and likely to think in words. Right-brained people are more creative, free-thinking, intuitive, and able to visualize. 79% of the people said that's true.
Sure. So that's, and that was a pretty common belief. And we know that there are, based on your left brain and your right brain, there's certain activity using functional MRI results to see where that activity is. But what we know that's more recent data is that it's the interactions between both sides of your brain and, frankly, the activity all over your brain that is really prominent and it seems to be what dominates how we interact, how we think, how we make decisions. It's not really relegated to one side of the brain, left or right, and whether you're more logical and analytical versus creative and intuitive. The one thing I remember from my 6th grade biology class was, was there's this bridge that's at the bottom of the left and right brains that connects them, called the corpus callosum, right? And it's this big conduit. And back then, because that was a long time ago, we used to think everything between the left and right brain went through the corpus callosum. It was like one big tunnel that just connected them. And that's not true. Now we know that not only blood flow, but oxygen molecules travel all over your brain when you're thinking about a problem, reflecting on solutions, meditating, coming up with your own action plan. So it's not quite the left brain, right brain dominance, things are separated. It's the activity across your brain that is really happening when you're thinking, coaching, reflecting, and deciding.
Great, thank you. Second one, our brain is in our head. That's why it's important to focus on what you're thinking. 79% said that's false. And I'm with you on that. Yes, it's important to focus on what you're thinking, and yes, we have a brain in our head, but as many of you know from other presentations that I've done, we also have a cardiac brain and a gut brain. So it's important to not just focus on what people are thinking, but also on what they're feeling. And very often it's important to get people out of their heads and in touch with their cardiac brain, with their enteric brain. We're going to spend some time focused at the Institute on how to do that. Knowing this has been very important for me when I'm working, especially with businessmen, but even sometimes with some business women who, I want to think this through rationally. I don't want to get emotional about it. I don't want, I just want to figure it out up here. The answer isn't always all up here. Okay, our third question, true or false? You can unwire a coachee's hardwired thoughts. 64% said true. Jeff?
Yeah, so we, as we create stories and beliefs, and we take what we are learning or deciding in our prefrontal cortex, and then we're storing it back kind of in our longer term memory, we do create hardwired neurons, collections of neurons, and those neurons are connected by synapses, and they stay as physical stories that are planted all over our brains, and that's what our go-to. That's the spot we go to. It's how we file things away. However, when we're actually coaching, we're not changing behaviors and thinking to the degree that we are unwiring or busting up that story. It turns out your brain follows what you pay attention to. And our coaching clients and others are focused on a story or an experience or a learning that they keep repeating to themselves that is not serving them anymore, right? Our job as coaches is to help them create a new hardwired story, action, behavior, belief, insight. And the more they pay attention to that collection of neurons, that story, the more the other one fades. It doesn't apparently in functional MRI studies and other results, like it doesn't break up, it doesn't dissolve, it doesn't disappear. But the less our clients pay attention to that old story and the more they pay attention to the new one, that new story, those newly hardwired concepts, beliefs, values, actions turn into the new story they pay attention to. So what gets paid attention to gets done. And in the brain, what doesn't get paid attention to fades, even though it still exists. It just fades in the degree to which you pay attention to it.
Jeff, any thoughts on the origin of the words wired and unwired that have been used in relation to this?
Yeah, I don't know about the origin, but it turns out based on what we're able to see in the brain now and the great technology that lets us look in the brain, neurons connected by synapses do look like wires that are twisted pairs, if you can go back that far, that are together, right? And then the more you pay attention to them, the synapse and the connection between those neurons actually gets stronger. It physiologically strengthens. The outer covering of those synapses and the neurons actually have more, they get thicker. And so I think the notion of wiring or unwiring or rewiring or hardwiring kind of makes sense, because in some ways that's what actually happens in the brain.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, our fourth. If a client wants to break a bad habit, they need to just change their mind about doing whatever that habit is. 71% said false. Good number, right on track with that one. Our brains and our bodies are incredibly designed to allow us to go through life without paying a whole lot of attention to it. You know, you get in the car and you find yourself at the office, whatever. So it's both the brain and the muscle memory that need to change in order to break a bad habit. And as Jeff said, the way to do that, with the example he was just giving, the way to do that is not to focus on the bad habit, but to build the new habit to replace it. And a quick example from my own life, back in the early 1980s, I decided it was time to quit smoking. I had been smoking since I was 14 years old. I've been smoking for about 20 years. Everything in my adult life was associated with smoking. I was actually very fortunate in that physiologically I could quit smoking quickly. But it was those automatic habits of reaching for the cigarette when the phone rang, reaching for the cigarette when I had my cup of coffee in the morning, reaching for the cigarette when I got out of the elevator. I had to not just relearn habits here, but I had to relearn habits in my muscle memory. This really struck me when about 5 months after I quit smoking, and some people here are old enough to remember, you used to be able to smoke on airplanes. And about 5 months after I quit smoking, I went up to the ticket counter for my first flight, and when the woman behind the counter said smoking or non-smoking, my immediate response was smoking. And then it was like, no, wait, that's an old bad habit. I have to replace that with the new one. Okay, our fifth and final true false. If the client doesn't know exactly what they want out of coaching, they aren't ready. 86% said false on this one. Jeff, you want to take it?
Yeah, yes. So I'm thrilled that most everyone put false down. As you probably have experienced, even if a potential coaching client or someone who needs your help and support and your expertise comes forward and says, I think I need some help, even if they don't know what the end goal is or what their top 3 things they want to change or shift happen to be, we're all pretty good at taking them through that exploration and a coaching approach to help them explore what is it they really want, what would success look like, what would it take for you to get ready, is still a really very valuable conversation to have. I know inside corporations and organizations, sometimes because the access to coaches is scarce or it's too time consuming or expensive, that they won't let leaders come forward with coaching unless they've sat down, written down 3 goals, they know what success looks like. And while that may not be the case in most places, there are some organizations or some coaches or some spaces where without a clear goal, you don't get to start coaching. But as GCA, where we're trying to make a difference for good for everybody, then yes, anybody who is curious about what they want to be or do differently is ready to have a conversation with any one of us on this call.
Great point, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that poll. That was wonderful. I think that was really, really nice way to do that. Appreciate that. Gents, I've got a couple more questions that I'm going to ask. And in the meantime, if any other questions have bubbled up for you that you really want to ask, if we have time, I'd be happy to ask them. So feel free to put them in the chat box. But I do have a couple more. Jeff and Brian, if you are able to give us a very brief example of maybe an exercise that you'll do in our time with you.
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask everybody to stand up and grab a hold of your desk or a bookcase or a counter, something nearby. And this is an exercise that I very often find useful with my clients.
Unless you're Gary, because you're driving.
Right. Now think of something that you want to achieve. And you can make it anything for this exercise. Clearly in a coaching environment would do much more building around this, but think of something that you want to achieve. And picture that across the room from you, over by the other wall. Now, without letting go of what you're holding on to, go ahead and walk over to achieve that. Pete, you're on my screen. You're not moving very far.
I think Adam has been handcuffed to his bookcase.
I can't go through granite, Brian.
And when I frame this exercise up with my clients, it's about the fact that in order to move, we need to let go. We can't hold on to everything that is, and at the same time, become or achieve something different. So that's just one quick example, and we've got lots of different ones.
Yeah, it's a struggle to walk through granite. It's right over the other side. I was holding on to the sides here. What takeaways do you want those in this meeting or watching this video to really remember from this call?
I think I just want everybody to remember that there are a lot more simple, useful, brain-based practices that we can all consider and try on our own. And you don't have to know the neuroscience behind it. Some people are interested in that, but really just practicing the practices and using the approaches are useful. And here's the great thing about it. There's not one thing that Brian and I are going to do in the Pre-Conference Institute or that we've talked about today that is harmful to anybody if it doesn't work. It just means their brain didn't light up around that, or there's another question, or there's a different action, or the granite got in the way, right? So this is one approach that is a really do no harm by nature, because all you're going to be doing is asking people to experience things or to think about questions or to reflect in different ways they haven't done so before. And if that doesn't work, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to add to that, sort of going back to the way that we've named the Institute. You know, I'm fascinated by magic, and I don't have a clue as to how it works. So I'm not very good at it. Understanding a little bit more about why what you're doing works helps you become a lot better at the magic that you're able to work with your clients.
Gentlemen, thank you. We do have a couple of questions coming up in the chat. There's a question from Doug. Doug, would you like to share your question?
Yeah, you spoke, Jeff, specifically that you can't unwire the brain. And, you know, in psychotherapy and other places, we talk about old tapes. I'm going to refer to that as the old wiring. If you're building new wire, how do you short circuit going back to the old wiring from the new wiring?
Yeah. So it's similar to what you've heard in psychotherapy or 12-step programs or other approaches. That is, there needs to be some kind of trigger, a word, and maybe trigger's not the right word in this sense, because that's a neuroscience term. There needs to be some kind of signal that tells you it's time to pay attention to the new wiring instead of the old one. For some people, it's a symbol. They pick up a stone or a shell, and it's supposed to remind them to do the new thing instead of the old thing. And so a word, a symbol, something physical, a mantra, a note in the calendar, there's some prompt that reminds you in the early stages, ooh, pay attention to the new story, not the old one. And then the thing that reinforces that is that the reward of doing the new thing is so much greater and so much better and feels so much better than doing the old thing in the old story and the old tape and the old wiring. So you got to start to see the benefit or the reward and focus on what you're getting that you really, really want, as opposed to what you were getting in the old story that may or may not have served you, but it sure feels comfortable because it's always been there and it did something for me.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Jeff. And Harry, we have a question. Go ahead, Harry.
Yes, I have a question and also one thing for you to comment on. Before Susie Orman became the guru of finances, she was very poor and down and out. And she sat down and wrote a list of what she believed about money. And she was shocked at how crazy that list was. So she wanted to get rid of what she believed. And her technique was to sit down, take one belief at a time, sit down and write it out, what she wanted to believe. Write it out. She did that 100 times a day until that finally clicked. So if you would comment on that, and also my question in the chat room, is there some kind of exercise or survey like you gave us here about thinking about what you're thinking? I'm really interested in that, what you said about that, thinking about what you're thinking. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll start.
Go ahead.
What's interesting, Harry, is that one of our GCA coaches, Carson Cooper, actually coaches on that shift your belief about money. And he's got a whole methodology around that. It is not Susie Orman-ish, but it is focused. It starts with that same thing. What are your beliefs about this thing that is holding you back? And how do you shift your beliefs about that? So we have our own resident money coach and relationship to money coach in the GCA that I learned recently. I think one of the things that we can do there's not a test. I think that as coaches, what we need to do is to really focus our questioning and our curiosity, not on the problem, on the client's problem. When we do that, we're going to ask questions about the problem, and that gets them thinking about something that's not their thinking. The notion of being curious about how clear are they around this thing that they say that they want. On a scale of 1 to 10, what's the number they would put around how close they think they are to achieving it right now in this session? So reflecting on our own thinking as opposed to focusing on the problem is really the, not the test, but the way to get clients thinking about that and approaching their way of thinking about their thinking. We can actually prompt that for their brain. We're not tricking them. It feels like magic to them, but it's not. We're prompting their brain to think about their thinking instead of to think about the problem. And the more we do that, the more ways we have to do that, the more skills and tools in our tool belt to help clients do that, then the more curious we can be, and the greater they get a chance to think about their own thinking and their own beliefs and their own values and what they really, really want, instead of what's not working and what's been getting in the way.
Thank you.
If I can add to that, my clients sometimes laugh because the first fundamental question that I ask them is, what makes your heart sing? And what I'm trying to surface is where they want to go. But it's not, you know, gee, I think it's a really good idea if I retire in 5 years and move to Costa Rica. Because that's a good idea. That's up here. And it's going to be tough. You know, and this is a real client example. Second marriage for the husband and wife. They still own 2 homes. It was during the housing crash. Both were laid off. How are they going to move to Costa Rica? How are they going to, you know, fighting bank foreclosures? If it's all up here, you know, maybe we'll sell one of our houses and we'll sort of hunker down where we are. That might be the best solution. If I can connect a client to their passion, and then they begin to create a story, not about when they do that, because again, that's all up here, but a story about the success they've had in doing that. You know, we had to deal with fighting foreclosures. We had to get rid of these 2 houses. We had to do this while neither of us could find work. But we did it. We woke up this morning with the ocean air blowing through our windows. We're in Costa Rica. Now you're beginning to create a new neural pathway to that future, whatever it is. And not only your mind, but your muscle memory begins to look for ways to make this happen. I'm trying to research this. I really believe that this is what triggers the subconscious. I don't have the evidence for that yet. But when the obstacles come up, you believe that there's got to be a way through them because you know what it feels like on the other side.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jeff. Harry, I want to be cognizant of our time and wonder if you need any time to check out. We do have one more question in the chat box. So what are your thoughts on our checkout today before I jump into another question?
We can go till 5:15 or 5:20.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
And so the next question is actually, well, Tom, you had a comment. Did you want to share your comment, and did you have a question around that?
Hi. My question was really not so much a question as it was a comment. It kind of was dealt with. The sense of ritual is really sometimes a memory thing. We tend to program ourselves with rituals, and the rituals then bring up feeling states, and the feeling states are both gut and heart. So the question really has to do with when we're reprogramming ourselves for a new behavior. Is it best to think in terms of ritualizing the new space, the new behavior, and the new thought process so that it becomes more of a habit because we're ritualizing it?
I'll start with that, and then Jeff, ask you to jump in. Ritual historically has been an important part of how culture carries forward. And by and large, we've lost ritual. You know, one of the wonderful things I love about the GCA conference is there is ritual built into it. And while we continue to evolve and develop that, at its heart, the ritual is still there. What you're saying, Tom, from my perspective, is absolutely on point. Once again, it's not about breaking the old; it's about really strengthening the new. So, creating a new ritual around whatever that is that's important to you can be a very, very powerful way of shifting mindset and behavior.
Jeff, anything?
Thank you.
No, that was awesome. Nothing to add. That's great.
Patrick, you had a question.
Hey guys, so we've been playing around with a new neurofeedback device, the Muse. It's a lot of fun, and talking about building new neural pathways. So I've been curious about coaching people. It's only $250, and I don't know. I'm curious to see your thoughts on having coaching people who are doing the neurofeedback.
Brian, you want to start?
That's quite frankly, and glad to do some research between now and the Institute. I don't know a lot about the research on that specifically.
Sure, yeah, I'll pick it up. So the holy grail of brain-based coaches and neuroscientists and social scientists who are researching this is to have, your own functional MRI cap on. But more importantly, not just watching brain flow or activity, but maybe even where oxygen molecules are going, like where's the activity, not just blood flow, so we don't have to have a proxy for activity. So I think, I've heard about the neurofeedback device. I haven't used it yet, but the notion is the more information we can give clients, the better. I think it's similar. Well, an example I can give that I think is useful is being able to use biofeedback devices. Remember the little mouse where you put your fingers on the silver and you can feel and hear your heart rate go down. While it's not exactly the same, when you get yourself relaxed and you breathe, we can parallel that to your amygdala dampening down into that neutral to slightly positive emotional state, which is where we want, because that's when your prefrontal cortex opens and your heart is full and oxygen is flowing and your chest, is relaxed as opposed to tense and your gut is relaxed. So I'm curious to hear how you're using it, and I hope you'll bring that to the Pre-Conference Institute and share your learnings, and maybe if you can bring the device and let some people try it out. What we're after is, why do we have to wait for MRI reports to come back, and how can we really just tap into people's brains without using electrodes and needle probes? So I would love to see how you're using it and just what you've heard. Ooh, it's stylish too. Look at that. Very nice. So yeah, what have you experienced by using it so far?
It's reading your brain waves from the front to the back, and there's an app, and it's right now it's being marketed for meditation, but the implications are much larger. I'm very curious about trauma and addiction. We don't know what's going on there. We know it's in the brain somewhere. So this is reading the EEGs. It's an EEG device, and it's reading your brain waves. And the way the app works is, as you're meditating, it either plays, rain sounds when your brain is really active, or the weather clears and you start hearing chirping, and the chirping tells you it's like the reward. So you know that the skies are clear and there's a bird is chirping next to your shoulder, and then really quickly you want more birds. So you're training your brain to go to that calm state. And me and my husband are using it, and we're having a lot of fun with it. Just to, it's a game, and then you finish the exercise of the meditation, and then it shows you, it gives you certain rewards, like how many birds you got and things like that. It's just stimulating that reward circuitry and learning to meditate. There's other devices you can buy to more different types of scenarios for more complicated things, but I will definitely be bringing it and passing it around.
My thought is,
Cool.
it doesn't become an episode of Black Mirror, we'll be all fine.
It's not doing
What's
it. It's
called?
not sending any waves in. It's just reading waves. So that's the difference.
What is it called again?
The Muse, M-U-S-E, the Muse
Thank
2.
you.
And it's only $250, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Patrick. Thank you for sharing. Gentlemen, actually, I have a question. The workshop that I'll be doing uses a lot of imagery and archetypes. And often I found that in using these images with an image and a word on the image, different parts of the brain have been engaged. And I often say, you know, it's an easy path sometimes to connect head to heart, but I don't have the science behind it, right? So this is fascinating to me. I'm curious, you know, Brian, you talked a little bit about visualization. I'm using images, also music in what I'm doing as well. Is there any difference, and what experience have you had with images and music and how that plays out?
You want to start on that, Jeff, or you want me to?
Go ahead.
So there is a difference. Words and images and sounds and smells all trigger different memories and connect us to different experiences, if you will, in different ways. So I'm trying to remember, I was just reading something. In fact, I think I sent it to you, Doug, that I was just reading something today in The Body Keeps Score about how every sight, sound, smell, thing that we touch affects how we're thinking, and they each affect it in different ways.
Fascinating. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would just add that more is better. So if people can see it, hear it, touch it, experience it, get up, walk across the room, talk about it to each other, write about it, teach it to somebody else, then they've created an even greater awareness and a deepening of what they've seen, learned, and experienced.
Any other final thoughts from Jeff or Brian, or actually before I go there, any other final questions that I'm opening up? There's no more in the chat. Raise your hand if you have a question. It'll be all good. Wonderful. Any final thoughts, Brian, Jeff?
Yeah, if you're going to be at the Institute, keep on sending us your questions. Brian at transforminglives.coach, Jeff at nallygroup.com. And they're really challenging us. We're building them into the workshop, and any that we can't find a place to fit, we'll be sure we're keeping time at the end to address.
And Jeff, any final thoughts?
If you haven't registered already, please register for the Pre-Conference Institute so we know you're coming and we can plan on that. It's also the opportunities I've had to go to a Pre-Conference Institute. It's such a great way to ease into the conference. I get a whole day to relax, meet with people, take time with a few topics, get settled into Easton Mountain, as opposed to just kind of coming in and then starting the conference right away. So I kind of go to the Pre-Conference Institutes when I can because I'm selfish and it's good for me. So we'd love to have you there, even if you just want to ease into the rest of the conference.
Great. I personally want to thank both Jeff and Brian for all their hard work on this and their attention to detail with the pre-conference, the planning. And some of you may be thinking, wow, Pete, what wonderful questions. And that was not me. That was Jeff and Brian sending me some wonderful questions to ask them. So a huge appreciation to the both of you for your work. And helping us.
Our pleasure, but they sound so much better with your accent. They sound so credible, so interesting. They're so full of life when you ask them.
Much appreciated. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.